I would start small. Maybe find friends that you trust, like create your own ensemble of a safe space and do like a tiny like quartet, quintet, and say like, hey, I'm going to try conducting this. Do you mind giving me tips? You're surrounded by people who support you, and also that it's okay to mess up. So that would be my 2 tips.
Hey there, welcome to the Conductor's podcast. I'm your host, 𝗁𝗵𝗃, a conductor with over 20 years of experience working with professional symphony orchestras, opera houses, new music groups, and vocalists. I'm also founder of Girls Who Conduct and have mentored hundreds of conductors from across the globe. I created the Conductor's podcast to share all the behind-the-scenes secrets with you while I interview conductors, musicians, and business gurus from around the world. This is a space created for conductors, conducting students, musicians, and non-musicians who are curious and interested in learning more about the profession, craft, industry, and business. Shy away from the real talk? No way. Money, hardship, growth, and the roller coaster of a conducting career are all topics we discuss here. I will give you simple, actionable, step-by-step strategies to help you take action on your big dream, move through the fear that's holding you back, and have a real impact. Now, pull up a seat, make sure you're cozy, and get ready to be challenged and encouraged while you learn. When was the very first time your inner voice told you that you might want to be a conductor? You might have shushed it the first time, but did that voice keep coming back and tell you that you could possibly be a great conductor? If you're a musician thinking about potentially exploring the path of a conductor, this episode is for you. Hi there, welcome to episode number 7 of the Conductor's Podcast. I'm your host, 𝗁𝗵𝗃, and I'm thrilled that you are tuning in with me. As my guest today is an old friend, and we have had some wonderful adventures together. I was always her conductor throughout this project, but recently, she had started conducting herself. I have to admit though, when she first picked up a baton and started waving her arms, I thought myself might be out of a conductor's job though. No matter if you're a musician in other fields, an instrumentalist, a vocalist, a composer, a sound engineer, if the idea of conducting had ever popped into your mind, consider it a sign that you should really try it out yourself, because it's a wonderful thing. It's time to wave your arms in the air like you just don't care. My guest today, Jennifer Jolley, is a composer, a blogger, and a college professor. She has received commissions from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Mid-American Center for Contemporary Music, the Left Coast Chamber Ensemble, and many others. She promotes composer advocacy through her opera company, NanaWorks Opera, for which I serve as the music director still, and she frequently writes for New Music Box and I Care If You Listen. Also, she is on the Executive Council of the Institute for Composer Diversity and the New Music USA Program Council. Welcome to the show, Jen. I'm so thrilled to welcome you to the show, and I can't wait for you to share your story and experience with my audience. So before we get started though, will you please give everybody like a brief intro, just a little bit about your background and how you get to where you are right now?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Jen Jolley. I'm a composer and a professor person, and I do write blog posts on my own website and on icareifyoulisten.com and New Music Box. A little bit of my background. I started studying piano at 6 years old. I was super obsessed with the piano, but I wasn't terribly obsessed practicing the piano. But I was good at it. I also, in hindsight, realized I was improvising. So long story short, got into film music, decided I wanted to study composition. So I studied composition as an undergraduate at the University of Southern California, Thornton School of Music. And then later in my life, went to graduate school at the Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music. And right now I am an assistant professor of composition at Texas Tech University, where I teach composition and music theory and computer music.
That's really cool. And Jen and I went way back during my time at CCM. I was doing my master's in conducting when Jen was starting her DMA in composition. And we met at the really like kind of the typical composer reading session, because the orchestra there used to do the composer reading for the composition students, where we conducted their pieces with the orchestra so they can get a feel of how it sounds and how it is when you have musicians playing your music. So, and the reason why Jen's here on this podcast is because she recently started conducting herself after so many years. Can you tell us a little bit about the story, how you finally got started?
Yes, I will tell you all the details. So I actually have a tiny, tiny bit of conducting experience. Tiny. So when I was an undergrad, actually I had to take both choral conducting and instrumental conducting. My instrumental conducting class at the time was not great, taught by a very, very old conducting guy. And yeah, it's just very old fashioned, but I really liked choral conducting. And so I tried doing it myself, like conducted a couple of student choral works. And also I asked the TA at the time, I'm like, how do I get better at choral conducting? She's like, you just need to wave your arms. She's like, get a church job. So I ended up actually being a choir director at the 𝗵𝗵𝗵𝗃 Congregational Church in 𝗵𝗵𝗵𝗃, Vermont. So we did our simple, once a week choral things. And then I stopped conducting. I didn't take a church job when I went to grad school. And I really wanted to focus on being a composer. And I don't know, I thought at that time I had to specialize. So anyways, a few years ago, I was like, I really like, why don't I try conducting like wind band stuff? Since I've really popular in the wind band world right now. So I'm just going to roll with it. And I've had some people in passing who said, do you conduct your own music? And I was like, no, I don't. Like, I just didn't. It was too risky, too scary for me. But I was thinking about it. And so I started asking some good friends of mine and mentors, kind of how do I like get into this without like completely failing and falling on my face. So I was at the OMEA conference. That's the Ohio Music Educator Association conference in Cincinnati. And I think that was in 2019, right before the pandemic. And they were doing my piece, Ash. And I was going to lunch with my friend, Jeff Gershman, who's the conductor of wind ensembles at Capital University, and Frank 𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃, who I studied with as an undergraduate at USC. The thing with Frank 𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃 is he is known for conducting his own stuff. And I was like, hey, so I think I really want to conduct again. And both Jeff and Frank were like, that's awesome. And then Dr. 𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃, or I'll just call him Frank now, was like, yeah, you should just do it. Just do it. I'm like, okay. He's like, I did. He's like, I have no conducting degrees. And they asked, and I just went for it. I'm like, okay, cool. Also, I'm thinking like, dude, you're Frank 𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃. Like, I'm sure they just let you do it. But he's like, here's a good idea. He's like, why don't you sign up for some conducting workshops? And he's like, and you know what? The first one, just audit it. Just audit it, because, you just want to get a feel of about it. And he's like, and the good news is once you audit it, you want to get up on the podium. So cool. And I was like, all right, I will do that. Then the pandemic hit. So that was a little bit of a bummer on many levels. But I told some other friends of mine, and my friend Mary Kate McNally was like, you know what you should do? You should go to the UMKC conducting seminar that Steve Davis holds. it's very encouraging. Yeah, let's just do it. And we were going to room together, and I was like, great, I will audit it. So I did just that. This past summer, I went to the 𝗂𝗵𝗂𝗁 conducting seminar. It was great to be back in person with people and to have an octet of live musicians. I sat in the back and watched everything. I just did not, unfortunately, I couldn't participate. I don't play a wind instrument. They had the conductors, not auditing, actually participate and conducted for each other because piano is my instrument. But that was wonderful. Also very surreal was my piece Ash was a conducting excerpt. So I had a whole bunch of conducting students ask me specifically how to conduct my own piece. And again, I was just like, although Steve was like, I'm so glad you're here. We should have you conduct at the end. I'm like, oh dear God. Okay, so fast forward. I'm thinking a lot about how to conduct Ash because literally people one by one are conducting it. But I was like, you know what? I'm going to do it. And it was really scary because I'm in front of all of my conducting colleagues and I'm in front of these young wannabe conductors or conductors. They're here to improve their skills. And I'm like, I'm going to conduct my own piece. I remember Steve Davis laughed and part of me is like, dude, I did no score study with the other pieces. And at least I know that one. At least I know my own piece. So I just did it. It was really scary. I was shaking, but I'm so glad I did it. And it was amazing. And I'm like, all right, now I want to just do it again. Like once I failed a tiny bit. So now I'm doing it, which is great. And it's still scary, but I think with practice, it'll get better.
Yeah. And then I wanted to circle back a little bit about the just do it thing because it's so much more easily said than done because everyone had been there would tell you, just do it, just go get up there, just don't worry about others, just forget about all those people watching or playing off your hands beat or whatever, while there are actually many more steps that you have to walk through until you get there and just do it.
Yes.
So can you maybe share with us some of the objections that you've felt or people told you or like the mini theater we say in Chinese, like we have the mini drama queen inside yourself telling you all the things that were not true?
Yeah, it is a mini drama in your head. So and it's hard to not see the people looking at you. You literally have everybody watching you. And that's just something, as somebody who used to perform more often as a pianist, granted, I didn't have to look at the audience, but you knew that people were watching you. When you conduct an ensemble, you literally do see them. It's not like when you have the stage lights on you as a performer and you can't actually see the audience. Like you're seeing your peers looking back at you because that's their job.
And you want them to look back to you.
You want them to look at you. You like ideally, yes, not be like eyes up here, right? I'm very fortunate that I have colleagues, in so much that my colleague here at Texas Tech, Dr. 𝗪𝗵𝗃𝗁, was like, oh, let's get, she's giving me these opportunities that are very low risk to conduct. So backstory with that, her TAs attended this 𝗂𝗵𝗂𝗁 conference. So she texted me back saying like, hey, we were going to do Ash at the band camp for high schoolers. Do you want to conduct? I'm like, sure. And then I'm like, okay, how is that? So I had to run rehearsal. And you're talking about, this is a huge group. I think all these parents were like, we can finally sign them up for band camp, like get them out of the house. And so I think they were like, gosh, the whole of Assembly Hall was just full of these eyes staring at me. So the barrier is you have to tell yourself that, yes, maybe it's scary and that it's okay to fail. And in fact, the reason why I'm glad 𝗪𝗵𝗃𝗁 gave me this opportunity, she kept saying, she's like, this is low stakes. This is high school. The performance is going to be at 3 p.m. on a Saturday. It's not live streamed. And I'm so thankful for her for giving me the opportunity because it was real, but also it wasn't like my peers, it was high schoolers, So I would say it. I would start small. maybe find friends that you trust, like create your own ensemble of a safe space and do like a tiny like quartet, quintet, and say like, hey, I'm going to try conducting this. Do you mind giving me tips? You know what I'm saying? I would gather people. Do you mind giving me tips? You know what I'm saying? I would gather people you trust. So just to be clear, the high schoolers were not my friends, but a friend and colleague helped set up a very low stakes way of getting started. And that, I think, it was so nervous at first. I realized I have way too many time signature changes in ASH, and that I kept forgetting them. My score was a mess, like 3 here, 2 here, like that was on me. But just knowing that you're surrounded by people who support you, and also that it's okay to mess up at first. You're learning. It's a practice. You know, your things aren't perfectly sight read when you practice an instrument. Like conducting, it's not going to be perfect, so it's okay. So that would be my two tips there.
Yeah, I think it's something that it's hard for us to get over with because it's totally different from practicing in front of the mirror, or you're practicing alone, a recording that you wave your arms to call on conducting Vienna field or Berlin field when everything was rehearsed and it's a final product. So you think you're doing all the great things. It's almost like practicing swimming on the ground. And when you finally get into the water, you feel you're drowning. It's like, oh my God, where's my perfect movement? I forgot breathing and all that.
Yeah.
So I think there are a few tips that you mentioned when you are just starting. One is you really want to find your cheerleading friend. You want someone that is supportive, that is friendly, and that you are in an environment that will allow you to practice, to learn. So you don't have to worry about like losing phases or possibly losing a job offer. You don't want to put yourself at a high risky position when you're just starting out. And you want to start small and find smaller ensembles to work with before you get on big stages with like hundreds of high schoolers, even that. And the last thing, the number 3 is you want to say yes to every single opportunity very quickly before you think twice and start doubting yourself.
I think that's great advice, 𝗁, because not before you second guess yourself, because that theater of the drama queen theater of doubt starts creeping in. And it's like, no, that's not a good voice to listen to. And that I also tell myself that, look, no one's going to die. Hopefully I'll cue my entrances. Like I need a score study. It's been a few years since I wrote that piece. So, so I'm following your advice, 𝗁. Thank you.
Good. And then I heard that you're learning so much more about ensemble playing, if I could put it this way, from having to conduct your own pieces. So can you talk to us a little bit about what you discovered?
So during that conducting symposium, I had a lot of thoughts with how many time signature changes I have in this piece, ASH. Now, I thought long and hard about this as a composer because there are some connotations with time signatures, emphases and beats and everything. And I was like, I eventually decided to have 5 beats of music conducted 3/4 and then 2/4. Now, in a more professional ensemble, I would just put my hand down, hold the note, and cut it off. So basically, as a therapist once told me, I have control issues, but I'm a composer, so I'm going to go with it. I wanted exact control with my fermata here. Now, that being said, this has an issue of gesture. So I'm not doing all the beats except for when I had to conduct for the high schoolers. They were like confused. I'm like, okay, we're going to conduct every single beat. But, there's a certain gesture with conducting an ensemble, and the gesture is based on the instruments of the ensemble. So I learned this through Mary Kate. Wind players, it's like you want to emulate how they're breathing through their instrument. String players, it's that gesture of bowing. And the reason why I bring up bowing is because also in the score, I have tiny breath marks. And there have been 2 variations in which conductors have interpreted it. Some have just made it as a lift. And in fact, my 𝗪𝗵𝗲𝗀, my colleague, does it more as a lift, and I'm okay with it. And when I conduct it as a choral conductor, I have this break, like I need time to breathe. So that being said, Robert Carnahan, who's director of bands at University of Miami, he's one of the guest conductors. He's like, all right, I have a question about these breath marks. Is it like a complete cutoff, or is it just a lift? And I'm trying to remember my own score. The octet arrangement forgot the breath marks. So I'm like trying to remember, and I'm like, it's in my head. And he's like, tell you what, do you see this as like a long bow stroke? And I said, yeah, I do. So then the gesture is more of this length with this like up bow lift and a breath. And so therefore I, as a conductor, interpret my own piece as this lift, this downward bow stroke, and that would influence my gesture. So now if I were to rewrite it, I think maybe a 5/4 bar, I don't know. Or like, if there's a way to just put like a whole note, maybe it should have been a whole note with a fermata, but the gesture, now I'm realizing time signatures should help conductors with gesture. And I think that's very important because we as performers have gestures in our physicality too. And I think that makes the music more physical and I don't know, more present, for lack of a better word. So that is important to me.
So I'm glad that you brought up the topic of time signature and time signature changes, because as
Yes.
conductor, that we have different ways to decide our conducting gesture when there are meter changes or when they are compound and complex and mixed meters. So like a 5/8
Yes.
can be 2+3, or it can be 3+2, or it can be just waiting there for things to happen, and then you go down to the next downbeat, depending on the instrument, the moment, and the tempo, and all that
Yes,
things that you just
all
said.
that. Mhm.
So I'm curious, like when you were composing in general, what prompted you to write down a different time signature? Is more like a phrasing or other consideration, like you say, the breathing that the wind instrument might need, or even like some bowing stroke, like kind of the physicality of musicians where you felt requiring a different signature, or like what was on your mind?
So my initial thought for the 3/4 plus 2/4 was that I wanted clarity. So a 5/4, at the time I thought like, well, there is that second stress because it's an asymmetrical time signature. I do have a tied note between like the dotted half note and the half note, so I thought they would get it. And then, I just had an epiphany, 𝗪𝗺. I was like, I used to choral conduct, and I think singers have a harder time with 5/4 than they do with like dissolving it. Because like as a choral conductor, you would dissolve your beat, dissolve beats. And I was like, they're going to dissolve the beats anyway. So I think that's why I did it. But
But
yeah,
instrumentalists definitely look at those signatures with a totally different mindset as opposed to singers.
Yeah. And something I've discovered in my own music is I actually sing everything. And even though I'm talking about a wind ensemble piece, I actually sing it inadvertently. Like I sing my own stuff because it helps me know when to breathe. And also, like if I conduct to myself, I'd like to hear it. So maybe it's because I conducted singers. Oh my. That's my answer.
But that's really a great score study tip for everybody. You should really sing the lines, and even if you're not a great singer, but it really helps you understand where they might need to breathe, or even with string instruments, you understand the contour of the melodies and some string crossing or some shifting that they might be experiencing. So let's get back to the second thing that you were going to talk about, like what would you learn now you're conducting as well?
So now that I have to conduct my own piece, The Eyes of the World Are Upon You, I think back to our mutual now colleague, Mark Gibson. And I remember I showed him a score of mine when I was in graduate school. And he's like, that's a really slow tempo. And he told me that anything below 72 beats a minute is really hard to conduct. And so now I was looking at the score because, again, it's great to have your friends around. I am exchanging lessons with my friend Mary Kate. She wants to compose. I said, great. Let's trade. I have a gig. Please help me. So I look at the tempo and it's 60 beats a minute and I'm like, oh no. So not to say that I'm not going to write pieces below 72 beats a minute, but just being cognizant that it's just a little bit, it's more of a practice. It's harder for conductors to conduct slow things. Now, Chow, you can verify that. But I'm like now super aware of how my music not only looks on the page, because that's also very important, but also like even having it clear in its construction, because conductors study scores and they have their own mapping systems. And, I learned this a lot through like Anya Mitchell-Spalding. She was also a guest, and she's looking at her maps and she was encouraging these conductors to have like descriptive words and energy graphs. And I was like, this is really smart. And I'm like, I actually use some of this as a composer. So I'm glad I'm doing that. But other things like now I'm thinking tempo and like really being sure about time signature and really being sure about the gesture. So yeah, the two things are I'm really now cognizant of time signatures, and now I'm like cognizant of tempo and also gesture.
Yeah, I did not know Mark said that, because that was, and also that was interesting to hear, because my teacher after Mark, Neil Varon at Eastman, he had a different range. So he would say, okay, when everything is around 60, then it's really hard to keep the tempo because you want to rush. I think it's probably like the same thing being said different way. Yes. And then he said anything that is below 50, you want to subdivide it, because that would help you to keep the tempo steady. While a lot of the younger conductors would also, the younger ensemble players would have real difficulty to really keep the tempo. But another sacrifice when you subdivide beat is that you sometimes break the flow, because a lot of times composers write such long and expanded phrases at that speed because they are looking for a certain way that the sound is structured. It's like usually longer and expanded. And when you are just there kind of waving your arm to 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2, or 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, you really break that flows.
It is, I will say, for lack of a better explanation, Western music sucks at rhythm and time. Our notated music is pretty great, but when it comes to time and rhythm and rhythmic analysis, like we suck at it. And it really does depend on the composer. This reminded me of my former composition teacher, Stephen Hartke. He tends to have these like bigger, I will furthermore say like medieval time signatures. And I think that's because he was a boy soprano when he was a child, and they sang a whole bunch of medieval music. He's told me that the reason why he chooses the time signatures that he does is because he wants more of like a greater concept of the time. And in the medieval era, they didn't think of time signatures as the way we do now. They thought more what they called mensurations. So it was just a more of an elongation of phrases, and that has affected his work. It really depends on the composer. And again, that's why score study is important, just to understand what they're trying to convey through time signatures.
Yeah, I think it's also something that's been missing in instrumental education in general, because we are trained to read and kind of decipher the notation very quickly and decide how we are going to execute, how we are going to produce all the sound at the right time and at the right pitch, while we don't emphasize as much the listening part and the give and take between your ensemble partners. And that was really interesting, like the time, because yesterday I was in rehearsal and we were doing this new composition where there are speaking parts from the different players. They have to speak 3-4 sentences, and then everybody has to play all of that. And everybody was stunned. They didn't know what to do because there was not part of their training to play just by listening to something else or someone else. They are counting and wanting to come and write together, while this choral experience, as you described, like a give and take, and you breathe and you watch, it's something that's more difficult, I would say, in ensemble playing, and it takes a little bit of training to understand the style.
I also think in the context of an ensemble, you think that you need to come in at the same time. So there's just a lot of barriers there. So anyway.
So now you're more, let's say, aware of the conductor's movement in general when you are composing. So that's kind of like an additional layer, right? Because I assume that when you're composing, you were thinking about how they're going to play it. Now, on top of that, you were thinking about how the conductor is going to put all the pieces together physically and mentally, like how we study it. And and I'm curious if you study your own score differently from if you were composing it, if it requires two totally different mindset.
I'm going to say no, because I feel like whenever I look at a score, I always try to see it from the composer's point of view. So like, I guess for my own piece, I'm kind of like, I think I'm just more of like a composition teacher being critical at my past self, if that makes sense. Like, I'll be like, Jen, why did you do that? You should know better. I'll be like, well, I know better now. Well, I can't do anything about it, but so I'll try to correct it. An example of this, actually, yesterday, I was conducting 𝗵𝗵𝗵𝗀, the contemporary music ensemble at Texas Tech is going to do it. And Dr. Eric Allen, again, I've just had really supportive people. And he's like, why don't you conduct your own piece and run rehearsals? I've also told him that, like, for me to help advise, like to have my 2 cents, I said, I want to conduct a piece every semester. So I'm just committing before I can change my mind. So I'm doing the rehearsals for my own piece because I actually can't make it to my own show, which is a little disappointing. But anyway, I realized that the way I hear music, coming from a pianist point of view, I hear an instantaneous decay. And so, I did a similar thing in the piece Lightway. So I have these eighth notes that dissipate, but I realized that as soon as they are done playing their eighth note figure and they have a held note, they need to get off it. They need to decay right away. And I did the same thing in 𝗵𝗵𝗵𝗀𝗃 because I was not aware I was doing this. So I'm like telling the performers, I'm like, here's something that I did not put in the piece that I'm now aware of, and we'll do it in my future writing music. In conducting, can you please diminuendo and do this? So I'm aware of, I guess, more technical things to watch out for my own pieces, which is great, because then I can like talk intelligently to other people. Like, if you want to perform my music, here are some issues or rehearsal issues that you might encounter.
I had a conducting mentor, 𝗁𝗵𝗲. He used to teach at the I need to check the name, Royal Academy of Music in London. So he was sharing his experience. I think it also was different because he was conducting the premiere. So he just finished writing the piece. So he was still in that creator's mode, and he had to go in and rehearse. And it was a disaster, as he described it, because he was still thinking about the creation of it. And then the players were not realizing what he had imagined, and he was like in the revision, probably also kind of a little bit in the revisional stage. Okay, maybe I should have written it differently so it would be more clear to the players, or maybe I should have written it in a different way. While 2-3 days into the rehearsal, he realized, okay, because I was in the composer mode, I need to switch to the conductor mode. Now my job is to put things together and help players to perform a successful performance.
Like, I have not had that experience. That type of thing. If I were asked to conduct the premiere of my own piece, that would terrify me. I would want more conducting experience first, because not only the mind spaces were overlapping. Like when I go to a second rehearsal of my music, never ever go to the first rehearsal. Okay. I am still seeing if things work. When I write a large ensemble, like for orchestra or wind ensemble, I am like 80% confident it's going to work. I'm very aware that the playback in the computer is not the same. So I just use it as a tool for rhythm and pitches and timbre. I'm doing my best guess. The more pieces I have performed, the more experience I gain in that realization. So 80%, probably about 10 years ago, I was hitting up 70. So I'm better now, but I'm still trying out some balance issues. And especially in the wind ensemble world, all wind ensembles are different. So it's different having like 3 clarinets play the beginning of a piece of mine versus an acre of clarinets. It's just different. So that sounds terrifying. I think that if I were in that situation, I would have to really be confident in myself. Like not only just do it, but just be very confident in my composer decisions, so that I can have that space to then articulate via gestures what kind of sound I want. That sounds terrifying, 𝗁𝗃. Like I can imagine it being a disaster, because your mentor was not 100% sure. And I relate to that, because I'm never 100% sure. Like I allow myself the luxury of having rehearsals to make some quick adjustments if needed before it goes out. And in fact, I like making those adjustments before I sell a piece of music of mine. So yeah, I'll let you know if I ever have to conduct a world premiere piece of mine. That sounds terrible.
But that's actually some of my composer/conductor friends started conducting, because they wrote a piece that was too complicated to put together without someone beating time at first. And they wanted the performance, they wanted the premiere. They found a few friends and paid them with pizza, which we all did pre-COVID. So then they decided that, okay, someone needed to step in. Sometimes the musicians would request it, that they were under-rehearsed. That happened so much back then, and I think still is, that you wanted someone there, maybe can give you a cue or tell you to wait, hold off 2 more bars, and that kind of thing. So a lot of people actually start from a different route, that, okay, they kind of started because they needed it for practical reasons. But I like that you mentioned something about being confident, because as you say, like when you're just doing it, even if you are starting small, you are having really supportive and friendly cheerleading friends and musicians that want to help you out. And you're saying yes to everything and commit and make yourself accountable, so you can back off. But what about this confident part? Like, do you still shake inside your mind? Okay, I'm not sure what I'm doing. I don't know if I'm clear enough. I don't know if it's my fault or their fault, even though I'm pretty sure it's their fault. I was being as clear as I can. Like, how do you overcome that confident part when you're stepping up onto the podium?
So jokingly, I told my primary care physician that I was going to start conducting, and she gave me beta blockers. So there's my security blanket. I actually haven't used them. I was afraid I was going to get very nervous for the high school performance, but fortunately my years as a performer was like, oh, this is a performance. So I actually was not shaky. Now, I still doubt myself, especially in rehearsal. Like, I catch myself afterwards where I'm like, oh, it was probably me. You know, I need to stop doing that. But what I've learned is conducting is a practice. It's like, I think you should approach it like practicing an instrument. Like, podium time helps you develop this practice, which will help you get more confident. I actually used to get very nervous for performances of my music, which made no sense to me, because I'm like, I'm just sitting in the audience. Like, but I think what made me nervous was the lack of control. But over time, going to performances of my music is fine now. It used to be that rehearsals would make me nervous, but because I've had opportunities to go to multiple rehearsals of my music, I now know what my job is as a composer. And in fact, what I get nervous about is like, what if I'm not hearing something right? Or even better, maybe my music sucks and that's what I'm hearing. There's that fear. So I'm noticing the more that I'm conducting and running rehearsals, that the more confident I am, and not in my musical decisions, which is universal, right? Instrumentalists or musicians and conductors and composers have musical decisions, but also my gestures are then getting more confident too. So in rehearsal this piece, I had to beat a 4 pattern because I wanted those eighth notes even, and I couldn't really make it musical. Also, I had to listen to the ensemble. So I'm not going to I gave myself permission to not think about the gestures yet. My job was to listen, actually know where I am in the music, and cue. Okay. After a while, this is, I think, the 3rd rehearsal I've had with these players, I'm more confident. I know who they are. I know what they're going to sound like. I let them tune now before rehearsal. That's a plus. Forgot about that. But then I have more confidence in my gestures. I know the piece. I've actually practiced conducting the piece through rehearsals. And so with practice, you get more confident. I still doubt myself. I doubted myself yesterday, and I made a self-deprecating joke to Eric Allen. I'm like, well, that was better. And I even made a joke to the performers. I said, don't worry about it. I said, on the performance, you'll have a much better conductor. And I'm like pointing to Eric, through my hand. And he's like, no, they're sounding better. They're sounding more together. And, I was like, the purpose of rehearsal is that they learn to play as an ensemble. And then it's my job to fix things. And then my gestures will follow.
Yeah, I think it's great what you just said. And it's really funny you talked about this controlling thing, because as control freaks, as the two of us, you actually chose things that you have the least control over, like composing and conducting. You are giving yourself up in a way that you're letting people to realize and to produce the sound that you want, while you have no real power over how they are doing it.
Yes. Yes, you have to trust your players.
Yeah, and I like what you just said. The conducting comes in phases. So don't think that you're going to nail everything at the very first conducting experience, that you're going to show all the styles, also cue, also show phrases, and keep a steady tempo, and all the transitions will be perfect. That is not the case. But really identify small tasks for each rehearsal. For each time you get on a podium, like you say, okay, this time I'm focusing on getting the rhythm right and the tempo right. Everything is together. People know when to come in. Once you pass that, you feel a little more natural, and the gesture are coming natural. You don't have to even think about it. Then move on to the next thing. Maybe you start cueing with more styles in your hands, or if you're showing phrases, if you let go some beats when they don't need you and they don't freak out.
Yeah. My goals for yesterday's rehearsal, my only goal was to get from 4/4 conducting to 2/2. And that was my thesis for the whole rehearsal. So I did it in 4, still need to work on eighth notes being even, asked for a different articulation. And then I said, all right, we're going to conduct it in 2, and we're going to just run it because they need to hear how the whole piece, we're at the point where they need to hear the whole piece of music with an ensemble. So yeah, that was the goal.
And I just want to put it out there, because I know some audience member might feel, okay, Jen has this luxury, which a lot of us don't have, because she has an ensemble that she can rehearse them, she can grow with them. While when you're starting as a conducting student, just getting your feet wet, you're often only given 5 minutes or 10 minutes here and there. You want to be the best, you want to impress people. But I would really encourage you, don't worry about impressing others, but really focus on what you're doing, what you're achieving. I always think that the goal for any rehearsal is that we get better at the end of the rehearsal. than the beginning of the rehearsal for the players and for yourself too. It's all these little things and small actions that we do every single day and every single rehearsal, which led to this seemingly overnight success. Someone won another competition and the career took off. But it was all this little thing before.
Okay. I want to get more confident. I think that'll fix a lot of things for me. Not that I'm conducting badly. I don't think I am. I think I can be better and clearer. So I want to be more confident in my musical decisions and my past musical decisions. That's something. And I would also, I would say probably better cues. I am actually, I have more experience. Like I said, I know where like sopranos, alto, tenor, basses are. With my cues, and that includes for me, like not burying my head in my own music. That's not great. I feel like I will do better with score study, and I'll be a better student. And if I'm more prepared, I'll be more confident. And I think that will help with a lot of things.
That is also true. Like we also grow as we learn our scores or learn our score studying skills. That's kind of a funny thing to think about,
Yes.
But we actually become a smarter student in our own way so we can learn faster and better. But I really have to say, I felt wind ensemble rely on conductors cueing a little more than for orchestra, just in my experience, because a lot of time they freak out if they don't cue, like if they don't see a cue, they doubt themselves, even if they're counting and they've played this piece 100 times. They're like, oh my God, am I wrong? She's not cueing us. And they will stay at me.
You're right. So one more thing, I keep forgetting about this just because I guess like I'm in my 5th decade of my life now, but I did a composer conducting seminar at the Bard School of Music. They used to have every summer. And I basically signed up for it because I was like, I need a chamber orchestra piece to include in my portfolio for doctoral programs. So I conducted in front of a string quartet. So I think that has more of an orchestral idea, especially with like, I was taught there, like, do not conduct every beat. They're like, people can count to 4, but just is more of like a bow stroke thing. That wind ensembles want more of like a cue. I wonder if that's what's something they learned in schools, because there's very much this educational imprint with that type of conducting.
Yeah, my experience is it's both. It's how they were trained, because kind of the music education system, and especially in the United States, have a specific way of training our teachers. So when they go to wind ensembles growing up in middle school, high school, or in marching band, they're very used to seeing all the actors. They want to see all the beats. They want to see all the cues. While choirs, for example, they probably don't need all the beats. They want to see breathing. They want to know, like, sometimes even the text. Okay, so this text is song until here, how you deliver the words, and then you breathe together. So if there's a split second or two not right on time, it's totally okay. We still know where we are, as opposed to string players very often do not think about breathing because that is not part of their music making, but they're thinking about how to move their arms. Yeah.
Right. So, even though they do breathe. And also with singers, you have to tell them where to like end their consonants. So I noticed in my conducting gestures the other day, I went bing, like I was like on a way articulating what a T would sound like to the vibraphone and piano, because I wanted a ding, ding, so I found myself articulating like a choral conductor would. But you're absolutely right, Qiaowen.
Yeah, and then that's all part of the learning. So don't freak out if you're conducting a different ensemble and suddenly the players are telling you totally different things. Hey, we don't want to see all the beats, or why are you not giving us all the beats? Just don't let those comments affect your confidence, because you're a good musician and you're a good conductor in training. Don't think that you're so great that you don't want to take any advice, but we are all in this together. And Jam, so happy to have you here on the podcast. Do you want to share with us your like social media handles and your website? I will, of course, link it all in the show notes, but I want people to hear it from you.
Absolutely. So my website is www.jenniferjolley, spelled with an EY.com. I'm also on Instagram as 𝗁𝗵𝗵𝗄𝗁. And my Twitter handle is Jen Jolley with 2 N's. And like Qiaowen said, she'll put it in the show notes.
Great. Please go ahead and follow Jan everywhere. And I have to say, her blog, 𝗁𝗵𝗵𝗄𝗁, is a must read. It's so funny and so interesting. She has such great insight on a lot of things about the business, the music, and the musicians, and this crazy world. And I love her dearly.
Yes. And thank you. Thank you. I love you too. Take care.
So my friend, if you're still not sure about conducting, it's really time to wave your arms in the air like you just don't care. If you're just starting out, take from Jan's experience to audit a conducting workshop before moving on to participating in one that welcomes newcomers. You want to find your cheerleading friend. If you're shy or don't want to tell your close friend yet, I can be your cheerleader. Just tag me on social media. I'm at Ting Qiaowen on Instagram and at Qiaowen Conductor on Facebook. When you are just starting out, try to find a low-risk and small ensemble to work with. This can be younger musicians or in a school program where everyone is also learning themselves. Getting your basics done before working with professional ensembles will serve you well. And lastly, if ever possible, say yes to every opportunity quickly before you have the chance to think twice. Learning how to put yourself out there, trial and error under pressure, and making peace with the risk of failure are all part of being a conductor. Continuing the topic of stepping onto the conducting path for the first time, next week we will discuss how to find the right conducting teacher for you and what you should be looking for with your first conducting teacher to set a great foundation with Talia Ilan. Talia had taught conducting for over 20 years, and the episode is full of wonderful information. I hope today's episode gave you a bit more courage, and if you were listening from the car or at the gym, you can always find all the info in the show note at qiaowenteam.com/7. I will see you again next week, same time, same place. Oh, and if you haven't subscribed to the podcast, I encourage you to do it right now. You can subscribe on Applecast, Spotify, Google Podcast, or any platform that you are currently using. I don't want you to miss any new episode. Take care and bye for now.